First up, we got knee flexion. Knee flexion is the bending movement, so one bone segment moves towards the other and decreases in the angle of the joint. It takes place in the sagittal plane and it rotates around the x-axis. Next up is knee extension. Knee extension is the movement of one bone segment away from the other, producing an increase in joint angle. It also takes place in the sagittal plane and rotates around the x-axis. Next up is shoulder abduction, which is movement away from the body's midline. It takes place in the frontal plane and rotates around the z-axis. Next, we have hip adduction. This is the movement toward the midline. It takes place in the frontal plane, and you start your leg out going towards your midline and rotates around the z-axis. Next up, we have trunk rotation. Rotation is the movement of the bony segment around a vertical axis, and trunk rotation takes place on the transverse plane and rotates around the y-axis. Now we have hip internal rotation. Hip internal rotation is the movement of the bony segment around a vertical axis, but internal means towards the midline, and it takes place in the transverse plane and rotates around the y-axis. Lastly, we have hip external rotation. External rotation is bony segment movement around a vertical axis and away from the midline. It takes place in the transverse plane and rotates around the y-axis. Thank you for your time, and please hook us up with a name.